Let us begin then. Om Madhura Sharla Vakyai Tatvam Prakasham Kurshagata Parisheshopisha Putro Mrito Yaha Tam Matishayam Pavitram Merijam Lokabandhum Parma Prema Murtim Dinanatam Bhajamaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We make our eternal obeisances to the Christ, whose sweet and simple words reveal the truth of God, who, though crucified, is eternal, the Son of God, who is purity incarnate, born of Mother Mary, who is the friend of all, the Lord of the lowly, and supreme love personified. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Shtapakaya Cha Dharmasya Sarva Dharma Swarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. And so with those salutations to Jesus and to Sri Ramakrishna, here on the day after Christmas, we meet for our after Christmas satsang and heading towards hopefully what's going to be a very bright and beautiful new year, Kalpataru Day for us on January 1st. 2021 is a good orderly number in which to start off our new year and our New Year's resolutions, as they say, all being along the Vedantic lines and all inclusive, as Sri Ramakrishna liked to say, of Samanvaya, including everything into everything of a healthy and nutritious, spiritually nutritious way into our daily lives, and trying to bring some balance into life for the main percentage of humanity, which seems to be teetering under a lot of stress and fear and doubt. And Vedantists and Buddhists and Sufis and other adherents to these powerful traditions of the world use these times of challenge to attempt to bring more peace into the world, to deepen their spiritual life and intensify their spiritual practice. He says that's the one main thing that Sri Ramakrishna pointed out to us, that a man is born to no purpose who, if he does not use this human birth to try and realize God. So it was a blanket statement he made, a very powerful assertion that spiritual life was probably more than just being worked into our life, had to become the main end and aim of everything that we do. And in that way only could we transform this Maya into Brahman, or take the poison of relativity and turn it into the nectar of immortality, as we looked at in our recent retreat here in Hawaii with Holy Mother. And so today we'll go on with a satsang followed by an hour's break, and then another session with God blogs. I posted 2 or 3 new ones this last week. So if you want to take that hour, if you haven't done so already, to look at some of the God blogs, the Brahman Bites, we're calling them, and prepare yourself for some commentary and some, that is, commentary of your own, hopefully, not just my commentary, and also some questions that come up around these subjects, because clarification is very necessary, particularly prior to intensification. So we want to make sure that we're not making the mistakes that many beginning aspirants are making these days, just throwing themselves into various paths and various teachers and with different mantras and maybe a random search of the scriptures, but that we qualify ourselves in the tradition. As Swami Sheshananda used to always say, follow the tradition. He would fall upon us and try and communicate to us how important it was to take these traditions and take them seriously, dedicate to them for a whole lifetime. And in that way, set ourselves up for intensification after we'd purified our minds or qualified ourselves to receive such intensification, so that we wouldn't go awry in our practices. I was just writing yesterday about sitting in asana and breathing, because that's going to be the beginning of our seminar in January. We're going to call it the 4 fundamental limbs of yoga, prior to practicing the upper 4 limbs of yoga. So in that way, it's important to, when one sits and that subtle power prior to even Kundalini awakening begins to rise, called Udgata by some, that one is able to be prepared for the uprising of such power from ordinary consciousness or the states of ordinary mind to these sometimes surprising and very intense uprisings of Mother Power, or Shakti Power, we call her. And so in that way, to prepare ourselves with clarity is very important before we intensify our spiritual practice. And that's done by steps, or avastas it's called. Sri Ramakrishna was very masterful at teaching by steps and raising the aspirant just gradually and without faltering or without falling back, without compromising, but still moving ahead at not too great a speed, so that all these bases get covered. So with that as our theme to open up today, we should probably get right to the satsang questions, if there are any, from your readings and scriptures and so forth, and your experiences in spiritual life. And I see that Erica has one there.
Babaji. My question is how to maintain eternal moment awareness throughout the day.
Well, very easy, you just stay in samadhi all the time.
I guess,
but of course,
another part of it though is you talk about lucid waking for that smooth transition into lucid sort of dreaming. So how do you, it's more with lucid waking.
Well, when you talk about states, the non-dualist, of course, who is very masterful, doesn't necessarily see any difference between waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. They're just passing phases that one homogeneous consciousness looks out and observes. And we call that sometimes outside, inside, and transcendent. So many people are trying to move from external consciousness, where the senses are focused on external things only, to try and open up channels into the mind, which is the kingdom of heaven within. And if that's done, the best way to do it, of course, through meditation rather than through dreaming and deep sleep. But if you observe your states of consciousness rather than just plunge into meditation, that's probably more conducive to this slow growth I'm talking about, where you can observe changes. And when you observe changes, you also begin to have an idea of the changeless one that's looking on. And that's a good contrast to put yourself through, put your mind through, rather than just like the 2 pieces of white bread sandwich with no middle I've talking about in the God blogs yesterday, where you just either have asana or hatha yoga as the bottom piece of bread, and then meditation is the top, and there's nothing in the middle. It's kind of a way that some people practice meditation, is just sit and jump in. And that would be all right if you had a lot of experience and had mastered your inner states of consciousness, but most people haven't done that. That takes some deep contemplation and some long-standing witness consciousness to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff and see the difference between the real and the unreal, and espy one's Purusha and know that it is different than Prakriti. And or in Vedanta say, start to become aware of Brahman and withdraw from its Maya. Or just focus on reality and detach more and more from relativity. The more you go towards Brahman, the further you go away from the world, as Sri Ramakrishna was wont to say. So the opposite would be true too. The closer you get to matter and the world, the more your mind gets absorbed in it and God falls to the background. And sometimes habitually so. So it'd be good to create that habit of observing your inner states from a witness consciousness and make that the habit, rather than always trying to, maybe an hour a day or something, do your mantra or go, oh, it's time to go meditate. But you might say that's a description of the outer state and the inner state. But what your question begs is an explanation of the transcendent state, how to live in that all the time. We always talk about Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana as being the 3 proofs of truth, the three great practices in Vedanta. But Satchakara is a 4th one that they don't mention, and that's bringing it all back full circle, right into the world. But into the world means into that homogeneous, indivisible consciousness that looked inside, looked outside, and looked beyond, and found out that it had 3 levels, but then it never looked at itself. So there's this you ask about staying in higher consciousness all the time. And actually in this world, in this body, Holy Mother said, nope, not possible. She said, can you think about Brahman all the time? She said, no, there's just work to do. So, but another time she said, anytime I want, I can take my Atman outside from inside and look at it as you would take a fruit in the palm of your hand, and then put it back in and hide it, and then go on with this work. So keeping in the human body with the human ego and the human mind and the world that it projected, keeping yourself in witness consciousness is a sort of penultimate state that you practice. But you have to be efficient in your work, or you may hurt yourself or hurt others. And that's not just unconscious and mindless work. That's just not fully concentrated work. So you would have to bring, as Krishna says in the Gita, through those first 6 chapters, describe how important it is to bring continuity to consciousness in work. Action in action, he calls it. A very difficult art to master. And when one does master it, one finds, if one sees it mastered in another person, like in a luminary, then it's very hard to detect that that person is in that state. And you have to spend some time around that person, long periods of time, like the apostles did with Jesus, until they finally, sitting with him in Gethsemane and so forth, and going to the temple with him, and watching him get upset, to tear things up in various ways, you'd come to find it out about the deeper levels of consciousness that, and what was motivating such a person, and how even in with all the changes going on, that this person stayed in the same state of mind, and the outer appearances were different than the inner reality. And that's what we found with Swami Sheshananda there in Portland when we saw him, whether he offered flowers in front of the altar or was giving a discourse from the podium, or in his everyday life, or when he was giving satsang to us. We found that, well, the way I put it to one person the other day was that he just had no choices anymore. We talk about, oh, we need a choice and we need our freedom, and he wasn't seeking freedom anymore. He was living freedom, and it took away all his choices, and he didn't have to wonder what to have for dinner or what to do next, or what's coming in the future, or what happened to me in the past. It had all been paid forward into this eternal moment you just mentioned. And that's very natural, when it happens. So it's very hard to see, and Krishna mentions that in the Gita too. Very hard to see that. And but prior to seeing it, and prior to being it, then you have to practice it from that standpoint of observing naturally everything that goes by in the world of phenomena, like our volcano here, and you might have heard, just erupting again, and some of this fog coming back in the skies. We've been maybe through that three times since I've lived here, since 1999 on the Big Island, and we watch it come and go. And the ground shakes as we live on the volcano here. We have these earth tremors a lot. And they're all good moments to check in with yourself and do it from the standpoint of witness consciousness, where you're observing the passing of phenomena, and then you're observing it again, and then 10, 20 years later, you're observing it again. And finally, you get the idea that everything in the external world is changefulness, and that there's a foundation that you need to adopt to practice consciousness. And sometimes that has to be away from the world. So outer or external, then inner, internal, and then transcendent. That might be another description of three ultimate worlds. We know the three worlds we talk about are Bhur, Bhuva, and Swaha, pretty much the worlds of the animals and subhumans and humans. And then the second world is the world of the elementals, nature spirits, tanmatras, things like that. And the third world is the world of the ancestors, and bridging upon the heavenly realms of the celestials and the devas and devis and so forth. So those are three worlds that are inside of a seven-world system. But another three worlds they talk about are the external, the internal, and the transcendent. You might call the external this Burloka, but you could say all three of the lower worlds are rather external. And then the heart chakra comes, and that's your internal. And then the upper three chakras are your throat, third eye, and crown. And those are the transcendental, where consciousness starts to leave behind all worlds and all sports and all deities, and begins to dwell in that one consciousness that so many talk about, but few have realized. So to a rather long answer to your question, or rather commentary, but to put a capper on it, just say that back here on earth, where you bring everything full circle, is your chance to realize God in right here in matter, in material, in the grossest level of vibration. So if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere, kind of thing. And so that's why Sri Ramakrishna said, a man is born to no purpose who, having gotten the boon, precious boon of a human body, is not able to realize God in this lifetime. So it sort of begs the subject of wastage of time. Well, I'm wasting my time, but the luminary has put time to death, put death to death, put doubt to death, put fear to death. And there's no more time to waste, because time is an illusion. So there's your one eternal moment, and all of time exists in it, like the four yugas: Satya, Treta, Dvapara, Kali Yuga are like a layer cake. I don't know if I put that God blog out yet, but it's coming. I've lost track because 35 now, I counted 35 God blogs, and I've got another 24 that I haven't finished yet. So there'll be a book, of course, eventually, but we'll talk about that in an hour and a half. Is there any more questions rising today? Anurag G.
Namaste, everybody. I guess maybe a continuation of that question. I'm experiencing, like, the more I know that I don't know, and knowledge is infinite, time is finite. I've got so many interests, spiritual, like I'll walk by my bookshelf and I'll see this, the Upanishads and the four yogas. Then a book will drop off, a Buddhist teacher I used to have. I mean, there's not enough time in the day, and that's just spiritual matters. There's also, secular things that I have interest in. There's not enough time. It's been like knowledge I Ching. Whatever comes before my field of attention, I look at it, and then I realize a week later there were like 10 other subjects I've wanted to study and I haven't gotten to it, or things I've wanted to do. So how do you prioritize and select what to do with this ocean, this infinite ocean of knowledge, and we're carrying around a thimble to gather it up in? I feel like there's so much I'm missing. There's so much I'm getting, but there's so much I'm missing. And I feel, sometimes I feel saddened by it. I feel in ecstasy about what a feast there is. And I feel so sad that there's so much I can't gobble up. So how do you prioritize all your time and where you put your attention? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I suppose it would be through love, not through wisdom or knowledge. Wisdom and knowledge, Krishna says, is the great purifier. Nahi gyanenam sadrishyam pavitrami havidyate, he says in the Gita. And so that's what I mean when we clarify things before we intensify things. The real intensity is prema bhakti, or love of God. Who has that? We finally saw a man who undoubtedly had it in Sri Ramakrishna. And that's why I started off chanting to Jesus and then ended chanting to Sri Ramakrishna, because those two beings, more than any that we can think of, epitomize love of an ecstatic kind, a sort of a world erasing or dissolving kind of love. So I think when you're lost in the eternal moment of love, that then you realize the totality of everything that's within you, and you're in an ecstatic state that isn't counting this wisdom, that book, this book, and so forth. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna epitomizes that very well. But you could also say then there's that non-dual state of transcendence, which is Brahmagyan, and that too makes one forget about counting beads and counting scripture and counting slokas and counting deities and counting religions and so forth. That also takes you up into a very indivisible state. So Prema Bhakti and Brahmagyan are the two highest jewels that Divine Mother can grant. And she's loath to grant them to anyone until they're fully qualified for them. And then they happen naturally. So that's a kind of a transcendental answer to your question. As far as down here on earth, back here on earth, where we have a mind that's wanting to know, and we have ignorance to dispel, and karmas to neutralize, and samskaras to do away with, and practices to do, and yogas to fulfill, the 4 yogas, then it falls back into the realm of one's sadhana. How to master time is one of the rare jewels there. I again think about my teacher Swami Sheshananda with back to that what I was just saying. There were just no choices, so it seems like everything is just led naturally forward, and your mind is put on each particular thing when you take more and more of the I out of things and put more and more of God there. Like your Ishtam will guide you. We were here at the retreat a few days ago, and we were talking about the sense of agency, and I was prompted to sing that song to everyone, Shakale Tomari Icha Mai Taratumi, about, oh mother, all work belongs to you, others call it their own. And I'm the chariot, you're the charioteer, I'm the house, you're the indweller. It was a beautiful song that Sri Ramakrishna liked. And he liked it so well because he epitomized it so well. That he was really one, just like being one of the only examples we can think of just this ecstatic love that took everything away. At the same time, he had that endearing quality as well, that he had no agency in him. And probably if you put those two together, you see how divine love actually finally gets to the ego and dissolves it. Knowledge can do that. We do that in our dissolution of the mind practices in Vedanta and Buddhism. But so can this sense of non-agency or witness, as I was saying earlier. So I think the thing that we don't see, or when you're on the trail of trying to understand how to use your time, the thing we don't see is that when you're not doing anything is when you're doing the most. And it even sounds strange to say it, but the sense of non-agency opens all the doors to all the wisdom that's already within you. And then when your lower self comes back, even if it's in a pure state, like the pure ego, then it's starting to look at things again and want to gobble them up, as you say. So you're gobbling up what you already possess. It's just kind of the thing. So if you look at it, then it's the sense of agency that wants to possess, right? So in a sense, it can be a problem in the ignorant person. We know that because they're running after everything to try and get it and possess it when it can't be owned because it's empty. And we can use words like that philosophically, but we can never convince them to let go I almost posted that God blog last night called "A Snout Full of Porcupine Quills," because my dog jumped a porcupine once when I was a boy, and came back with a snout full of them. And my dad had to pull each of them out with a pliers while it screamed later that day. And so I was thinking about that, and another dog attacked a skunk, and another dog ran in front of a car and got killed because it was chasing a cat. And it's all canine consciousness. So I thought, people are doing that all the time. They're running after things, encountering them, and coming back with another quill in their snout. And the guru has to come along later, or Jesus has to come along later with a pair of karmic pliers and extract it, while they scream and complain about pain and suffering and so forth. So they get themselves into these messes since they can't control their senses like a dog. And then, they have to have all these karmas extracted later. So I'm talking about, of course, a worldly person. But I think it also happens to a lesser degree to a spiritual aspirant, is that now they may have thinned out the whole wide perspective of various things that they're after, and they may have also begun to realize that some of these things are empty, and some of them can't be attained, and there are some bizarre things that I should let go of, and so forth. So they're beginning to do discrimination in the process, and so, but the real ultimate discrimination is called renunciation, and only that is fearless, right? So it's when you get to that, that you find out that you have nothing left but God. There's nothing desirable but God, and there's only God anyway. That's all that exists. The self is all in all, none else exists, and thou art that. Those three in your computer screen there, those three young ones recited that whole thing for me yesterday on Christmas. Saraswati, Nick, and Erica. And so, Erica's still working on it. And so the Song of the Sannyasin was recited on Christmas here in our early morning meditation and our prasad meal afterwards, and a teaching on the Christ the Sannyasin, because we were comparing the Western Christ with the Eastern Christ, how one's a kind of conventional, pleasurable, Bhogamarg kind of Christ, and the Christ that India loves and knows as a sannyasin, with all this wisdom, non-dual wisdom, as the great sadhak, or the great teacher. So back to the honing out of, you might say, the prioritization of a spiritual aspirant, is to slim it down to those very few things that are essential, and that would be called discrimination between the real and the unreal. You're using that as your filter, only to find that you don't really end up with emptiness, you end up with fullness, that emptiness leads to fullness, and it's the only thing that will. So it's a very strange dichotomy, and we don't see it while we're in the process of moving towards it. Like Holy Mother saying, you fall asleep on the train and you wake up at your destination, but you don't remember anything that went by on the trip. So she's talking about karma there, of course, but it can also be used as an analogy for our eyes wide open, we're completely blind. As far as proceeding spiritually, you can't really measure spiritual progress. She says it's kind of arrogant to do that, and you won't be able to measure it anyway. It moves by so fast, and you'll just wake up one morning and your ignorance will be gone, and you'll have to say, well, I guess my sadhana did that for me. But if you hadn't have done the sadhana, then you wouldn't have that waking moment in which you could say that. So I guess that's the best short answer I could give, would be that as you look around to all the things you want to accomplish in time, that it would be when you do less that these avenues open, that you'll actually find yourself doing more. You'll be understanding more by understanding less. And those are those two phases of shunyata and purnyata, emptiness and fullness. In spiritual circles of advanced souls, they're called abhava yoga and maha yoga. And they sometimes fence with those two swords. They say, which one's higher? And some will say, oh, I like abhava, no moods, nothing, just nothingness. I love the nothing. I love the emptiness. It's just light. It's just peace that passes all understanding. I love that, you see. And others will say, the Maha Yoga side will say, yeah, but that opens up to this, everything is Brahman. And I can, I can have it all because I am all. And that kind of thing, you see. So I think the general conclusion that I've heard is that Maha Yoga wins in the end. That all is Brahman, everything is full of ecstasy. God is everything, God is all. But, it's very hard to compare apples and oranges, as they say. But again, the dynamic is that you said, I'm elated, but I'm also sad. See, that's the human limitation. That's the mind. That's the ego, and it's a measuring device. And at an advanced level of spiritual practice, it's kind of a, how they say, bittersweet. It's kind of a bittersweet position we find ourselves in as human beings who love God. That's why forbearance is the greatest default zone of the wise. They know they can't have it all in the human condition, but they know what the truth is. And so what they have to end up doing is forbearing. And that's a kind of use of time that's very efficacious. It's forbearance. It's a kind of simultaneous giving up of everything, and at the same time knowing that everything is. Back to Erica's question about the eternal moment. When you're knocking on the door of great principles like that, enlightenment is just one veil away. It's just one veil away.
And it's getting to the point for me where I resent having to go to sleep or to eat to take care of bodily functions. They feel like they're just a waste of time.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't eat all yesterday. I don't know why. And I usually don't sleep at night. So welcome to the club. Your mind just prefers to, doesn't want to miss anything. It's very strange because before you were trying to get everything, but now you're trying not to miss anything. So the ego is, responsible for you trying to get everything, but it's your Atman that's responsible for the insomnia of yoga, for the eternal fast of yoga. I tried to explain it in a recent God blog. I haven't put it out yet, but it's about a circus, and a cast-off balloon is talking to a bit of half-eaten cotton candy. And they're having a conversation, you see. And some soap bubbles that were blown from a bubble pipe by the breath of a young child are floating above the circus, looking down on this conversation between a lost balloon and a half-eaten bit of cotton candy, and they're having a cathartic conversation about life. And then an elephant comes along and steps on them both, and it's all over. So you'll like that God blog when you see it. It's called feeling a little hollow lately or something like that, or emptiness. I have no substance, but I have essence. I think I called it that. Who else has a question that we can entertain on this hour?
Babaji, do you have a question?
Yes.
So I believe I already asked you a question. This was, I think, during the retreat. I asked you whether or not pure mind was no mind. And you said, in short, yes, pure mind is no mind. And so but I still have some confusion. I was wondering if you could clarify what the relationship is between these sayings, pure mind is no mind, pure mind is God, and pure mind is a mind without desire. How do those three statements relate to the mind of a jivanmukta? If that makes sense. Like a jivanmukta, obviously their ignorance is gone. They have awakened to their true identity, but they still have a mind and they're still functioning in every day. So, yeah.
Yeah. They possess their own mind. In the case of most other beings, the mind possesses them. You might as well put Maya in place of the word mind. They control Maya, like Vishnu. Vishnu knows that everything's in Maya, but he knows also that he's the controller of it. He can't make it go away, and it's always there. It only disappears in jivanmukta or in moksha, but still he's gotten on top of it, distanced himself from it, and can now control it. And might as well add Buddha mind. Pure mind is Buddha mind. Lord Buddha said that. And then we have, 2,000 years later or more, we have Sri Ramakrishna saying pure mind is God. Chit Chuti, that's, it's just that another one of those very lofty spiritual principles that we're trying to comprehend with our limited minds and intellects. And not until we can control them, take them, like the dog with the porcupine, take the senses away from outer things so that we're not rushing. Because the Mundaka Upanishad says that the senses are outgoing, therefore they're defective. So we practice looking inward, and we find we have 5 subtle senses in our mind. Our mind sees and our mind hears. I was standing next to another soul, a few nights ago, and there was a window, and a curtain was over the window, and the window was open, and the wind was blowing from outside into the house, and the curtain was being lifted. And as the wind blew the curtain and lifted it, I could see the sun in the distance. And this was all a dream. I mean, really, not just a waking dream, but I was actually in a dreaming state when I was experiencing this. And I said to the person next to me, see, when the wind of God's grace blows, it lifts the curtain of Maya and you can see Brahman in the distance. And so it was it's just a window, a curtain, and an invisible wind out there with the sun to backdrop. And so that's how one begins to see everything as Brahman, that every little thing offers its secret up to you. And it does so in waking. But if the waking state is so impeded by obstacles that we place that many of them which we place there ourselves, and others which are just a part of the cosmic process, then the dreaming state will reflect the same thing. We'll see nothing but a bunch of nonsense in our mind, as Sri Ramakrishna said. Instead of looking in and seeing the light behind everything that he did. He took him to the wax display, wax figurine display that the English had put on in Calcutta, evidently. And they took him in there and he looked and he said, "Oh, look, that's how I see everything. Everything's made of wax." He's not talking about just someone who, put together some figurines. He's talking about everything in the world is made of wax to him. And there's a light behind it. And it's the light that he was interested in, not the figurines or the shapes or the names or the forms. And so his focus on that light gave him an ability to see. And that's what I told that soul in dream the other night, standing next to me. I said, we have to learn to see with our hearts and see with our minds. And that's just not just some happy little metaphor we like to say in New Age circle or something. That's actually what we're doing when we go inside. Is we're practicing with the 5 outer senses in order to discover the 5 inner senses, in order to arrive at the third eye. So you got 11 eyes there, 11 senses basically, right? 5 outer, 5 internal, and then a third eye. So you're using those in these states of consciousness. And if you only have 5 that go outward, then you have no one to blame except yourself when you get those porcupine quills of suffering in your face all the time. Because you're not moving inward to where reality abides. You're only staying out in this facade of reality out here. But a person who does open up the ability to see inwardly, when he comes back to the outer senses, sees everything colored, Brahman. Like Sri Ramakrishna said, if you put on yellow glasses, then you see everything yellow. And so when you put on this ability of the things that you saw from your mind's eye, and you bring them back and you put that mind's eye on the external things, and all of those things like a window and a curtain and a wind will just be a great secret being revealed to you every moment of your existence. You have to imagine that was what Sri Ramakrishna was feeling all the time. Why he always went into samadhi at this drop of a hat, as they say, because he was so tuned to divine reality inward that when he came outward, everything offered its secret up to him. It's not just some shamanic power either, or something you got through some intoxicant. This was something that was the nature of reality. And when you brought it out, it opened up everything effortlessly for you, including Anurag, that ability to see, to make best use of time, which is an illusion. But if you thought time was real and you tried to use time, then you simply ensconced yourself in a swamp called the mind in time and space. But if you knew time was unreal and illusory and you let it go, all of a sudden everything is flowing into you and out of you through a clear channel called the mind's eye. And everything is just divine reality. Now, I guess maybe I got away from answering your question, Saraswati, but that's what comes up to me when I think of the state of jivanmukta.
I think you brought clarity to me, because I think it's not really, the way that I'm understanding your response is that it's not so much that you could tell me directly how to comprehend the mind of a jivanmukta, but you could tell me how to qualify and prepare my mind to be able to understand. Like, for me to understand the mind of a jivanmukta, I need to cultivate my mind to be able to understand that. It's not in words that I will understand it. It's through, turning my senses inwards, and that's how I understood your response or your answer.
Yes, and I can add to that when you turn your mind inside, that is the work of words. I mean, I'm not one to undermine the importance of words at all, and I'm sure that's not what you're intending to say either. But seeing is speaking, and seeing is hearing. That's what I mean when we say you see with your mind and you see with your heart. And it's all done through the power of thoughts and concepts and words. It's just that people are using those things to make money. Like Sri Ramakrishna wouldn't go to school because that was mother wisdom, and he didn't want to use it for such a menial purpose. So he couldn't really be that Brahmin priest that he was supposed to be in the temple, because he was seeing the images that he was worshiping come alive through the power of vibration, which is words, which is thoughts, which is concepts. And he was calling them all not manifestations of matter, but manifestations of God. So he looked at them completely different. They were chinmoy, not mrinmoy. Mrinmoy means made of maya, made of illusion, and chinmoy means made of consciousness. So, so many people who are looking at them and calling and seeing maya only, they don't even know what to call it. So, if you understand what I'm saying here, it's a step forward when you can call something mrinmoy. I mean, you've actually made a huge step in your consciousness to say all of this is unreal. So the very first teaching of Vedanta is Brahman Satya, Jagat Mithya. Brahman is real, the world is unreal. So it scares people away because they don't want the world to be unreal. But it's when you can look at the world and see that it's changing, impermanent, transitory, and ephemeral, and so forth and so on. That's when you've made the first big whole. That's how you become holy, right? And I posted Swami Sheshananda's talk, Steps to Illumination, a few days back. Immediately, Anurag and Kanya wrote back and said, "Oh, I love that story where he says, how do you become holy? You make a hole, because there's this curtain in between man and God, and you have to make a hole in it so you can see." So that's the jivanmukta has probably already become maybe tore the whole curtain away. Wanted to see the whole thing. I meant to say that about your question, Anurag, was that there's a song in India that came to my mind when you were speaking about, "Oh mother, make me drunk with the ecstasy of thy love. What need have I of knowledge and wisdom? Make me drunk with the whole landscape of your love." He wants everything. And that's why I started out the question answering the question saying, ecstatic love does that for you. It makes the best use of your time. It opens all the channels. But if you hadn't have opened that channel with love, with knowledge and wisdom first, then that wouldn't be possible to become ecstatic like that, to see Brahman in everything. You have to empty before it can be filled again, right? If the glass is full, you drink it or you empty it and you fill it again. So emptiness comes first and fullness later. So if people are thinking the world to be their oyster, I mean, that's everything to them. That's mrinmoy. That's a delusion you're in, and you'll never make any spiritual progress. So that's why Krishna says only 1 out of every 1,000 approaches me. And why at the end of long cycles of time, we have hundreds and thousands and millions of people who are still on the trail of samsara and never getting free. So a jivanmukta is a really unique soul that has turned away from all of that and renounced it out of hand. The dharmic householder is a person who's making a hole in that curtain. So he reminds him or herself that that's the case, so that work, and job, and money, and family, and everything else in life that's showing itself up to be, or whether the case is it's not showing itself up to be empty yet, or it's beginning to show itself up to be empty. The dharmic householder has to remind him or herself of that every day by continuing to make that hole in the curtain of Maya, spying on God. You have your own personal peephole, see. And you like Holy Mother taking Atman out of her, out of her heart and looking at it and putting it back in when it's time to work or not. We have to do that with our ability to see God, at least in glimpses or in tiny amounts. Something that's a drop of acid, the most corrosive substance in the 7 worlds, Vivekananda called truth. It's the most corrosive substance in the 7 worlds. It'll burn through everything, but it'll take a little longer to burn through granite. So here in this world, a river takes a long time to create a canyon. So that's people with dense consciousness, granite-like consciousness, that truth takes a long time. And so here, Sri Ramakrishna said, that's why avidya shakti is more powerful than vidya shakti. Ignorance is more powerful than knowledge. If it weren't the case, and so many people weren't, if it weren't the case, so many people wouldn't be so obsessed with it.
I just want to add one quick thing before we close. That I was reading the gospel this morning, and I was really struck. We would think like for a jivamukti, it's easy, or even for an avatar, it's easy. But Sri Ramakrishna said, and I quote, "Spiritual discipline is necessary in order to see God. I had to pass through severe discipline. How many austerities I practiced under the bell tree. I'd lie down under it, crying to the Divine Mother, 'Oh Mother, reveal thyself to me.' The tears would flow in torrents and soak my body." So even for an avatar, there's no getting around spiritual discipline.
Yes, but I must say that, and it's my personal belief, there are other beliefs, but I must say that the avatar is, of course, a past master who already knows Brahman at all times. So he's coming to earth to show people how to do sadhana and how intense it must be in order to burn through that ignorance. The jivanmukta doesn't have ignorance, and an avatar is far beyond a jivanmukta in terms of capacity. So my personal feeling is that that's a show. But if you tell people it's a show, then they'll think, oh, it's easy for him, but it's hard for me. And so they'll get really turned off to religion and to practice. That's the point Sri Aurobindo made. But basically, if you can focus your mind on that one Brahman for even 2 minutes, Holy Mother said, in meditation, that's better than hours and hours of meditation, wondering what to do. So there's, again, the most important use of time is just in a couple seconds or in a couple minutes of concentration, rather than in hours and hours of meditation that you happen to do sometime. And I've graduated now. I've got so many hundreds of hours of meditation at the Zen monastery or something. But have you used 1 or 2 minutes to perfectly concentrate on Brahman and reap the benefits of that? So you might say that a life in the world that Sri Ramakrishna lived is just like a couple minutes of perfect concentration. If there is anything that he's showing in terms of it being a play, it's called Mahalila. It's the great play of the fully illumined soul and how to live on earth with God in your mind without dying. Because when that kind of intense concentration happens, then that's when the body can't take it anymore. So Sri Ramakrishna said, there's a song in India about the elephant that entered into the hut. And when it entered into the hut, it shook it down to its very foundations. So that's the elephant of ecstasy coming into the hut of the human body. And the body's not going to survive very long when that happens. The soul will want to give it up as a cage of bones and flesh. So you see how different that is than what most people are doing. As the father of yoga says, they're clinging to life. Abhinavesha. It's one of the 5 great obstacles, and the lowest hell you can fall into is to fear death. There's no lower hell than fearing death. So that's why this earth is a hell realm. It's a hole in the ground. And it's why everyone from Jesus to Ramakrishna is telling you, give it up, give it up. And before Jesus said it, Buddha said it 550 years earlier, give it up, give it up. So that comes back to the question from Saraswati and all that, how a jivanmukta can live in the world and still keep the body, whereas other people are trying to live in the world and wanting to keep the body. One can hardly wait till it drops off, and the other's clinging to it as if it's the only reality. So that higher transcendental consciousness then will make the most use of time, which is an illusion. It'll make the most use of space, which is all in the mind. It'll make the most use of name and form that it takes on as an assumption. But if name, form, time, space, and karma become real, then that's called Maya. And there's no spiritual evolution possible there. Yeah. It's very slow growth, or no growth at all. Slow growth would mean krama mukti, not jivan mukti. Krama mukti would mean that I'm making a little bit of progress here. And you can see how that can be dangerous and risky. When you're already Atman, you're thinking you're making a little progress. So I'll leave you all with that more sobering note. But in an hour, we'll come back and talk about some God blogs. I hope you'll all join us, and we can be together on the day after Christmas for another hour. So thank you all for being here and for the wonderful questions. That's such high-minded questions. I'm just delighted. Namaste.